It was 11:58 at night when I signed my name. I was 18 years old. I was sitting in the office of an attorney I had only met twice. The room smelled like old books and wood polish. Outside, it was raining, the kind of steady, quiet rain that makes everything feel like it's holding its breath. Attorney Margaret Holloway slid the document across the desk toward me. She didn't say anything. She just pointed to the line at the bottom of the page and looked at me with the kind of patience that only comes from watching people make the most important decisions of their lives for 30 years. I picked up the pen. I thought about my grandmother, about the way she had held my face in both her hands the last Christmas we had together, and said, "Nora, baby, promise me you'll hold on to it. No matter what they say, no matter what they do, you hold on." I had promised. That night in Margaret's office, I kept it. I signed my name at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before the legal deadline my father and uncle had been counting on me to miss. My name is Nora Callahan. I was 18 years old, and what happened in the 14 months before that signature, what my own father did, what my uncle orchestrated, what my entire family allowed, is something I have never fully told anyone. Until now. Stay with me. This story starts long before that rainy night. It starts with a cabin, a woman who loved me more than I knew how to hold, and a piece of paper she had hidden away for exactly this moment. This is her untold nights, and this is her story. Let me take you back. I grew up in a family with two kinds of people, the kind who built things, and the kind who waited for the builders to die so they could sell what was left. My grandmother, Ruth Callahan, was a builder. Not literally, she was a retired school teacher from a small town in western North Carolina, but she built in the ways that matter. She built loyalty. She built trust. She built a life so carefully considered that even after she was gone, the structure of it kept protecting the people she loved. The cabin was the most visible part of that structure. It sat on 14 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a modest place by most standards, cedar-sided, green-roofed, with a wide front porch that looked out over a valley so beautiful it made you feel guilty for ever leaving. My grandfather had bought the land in 1971, back when 14 mountain acres cost less than a used car. He and Grandma Ruth had built the cabin themselves over 2 summers, with help from neighbors and a borrowed truck and a lot of coffee and stubbornness. My grandfather passed away when I was 4. I don't remember him well, mostly the smell of his flannel shirts and the sound of his laugh. But Grandma Ruth carried him in everything she did. The cabin was their place. She kept it exactly as it had been the last summer they spent there together. I spent every summer of my childhood at that cabin. From age 6 to 16, every single summer, just me and Grandma Ruth. For 3 or 4 weeks at a time. My parents would drop me off and drive away, and for those weeks, the whole world shrank down to 14 acres and one woman who thought I was worth paying close attention to. She taught me to identify bird calls. She taught me to fish badly and laughed at my frustration in the kindest way. She read to me every night not children's books, but real novels. Grown-up stories with complicated characters and endings that weren't always happy. She said, "The world doesn't always give you a clean ending, Nora. Best you know that early and learn to find peace anyway." I adored her, completely and without reservation. Now, my father, her son, Patrick Callahan, had a complicated relationship with both his mother and the cabin. He loved Ruth, I believe that genuinely, but he also loved money and opportunity and the feeling of having more than he did yesterday. He was a contractor, always chasing the next deal, always slightly stretched between what he had and what he wanted. The cabin represented something to him that it didn't represent to me, not a place of love and memory, but an asset. 14 mountain acres that had appreciated significantly since 1971. My Uncle Dale was worse. Dale was my father's younger brother and the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately calculated what everything in it was worth. He had tried twice to convince Grandma Ruth to sell the cabin and split the proceeds between the family. She had refused both times, politely but firmly. The second time, she had looked at him across her kitchen table and said, "Dale, that land is not for selling. Not while I'm alive, and not after." He had smiled and nodded and driven back to Charlotte, and I had watched him go from the front porch and felt something I couldn't name at 12 years old, but can name clearly now. Distrust. Grandma Ruth got sick when I was 16. Ovarian cancer, caught late. She fought it for nearly 2 years with a grace and a practicality that still makes my chest ache when I think about it. She never complained in front of me. She cried once, that I saw just once, sitting on the front porch of the cabin on the last evening of our last summer together, watching the valley go dark. I sat beside her and held her hand, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Then she turned to me and she said, "I need you to promise me something, Nora." I said I would. She said, "The cabin is going to be yours. It's already arranged. Margaret has all the papers. But your father and Dale are going to fight it. They're going to pressure you and confuse you and make you feel like you're being selfish or unreasonable. I need you to hold on anyway. Can you do that?" I was 16. I didn't fully understand what she was telling me. But I looked at her face, tired and certain and so deeply loving, and I said yes. She squeezed my hand. She said, "Margaret Holloway. Write it down. If anything happens and you don't know what to do, you call Margaret Holloway." I wrote it in the back cover of the novel I was reading that summer. Margaret Holloway. Grandma Ruth passed away 8 months later. I was 17 years old. The funeral was in February, cold and gray and full of people saying things about her that felt true but incomplete, like describing a river by only talking about its surface. Afterward, we went back to my parents' house. My father and Uncle Dale sat at the kitchen table with cups of coffee and talked in low voices for a long time. I went upstairs. I found the novel from that last summer. I looked at the name written in the back cover, Margaret Holloway. I didn't call her that night, but I held on to the name the way my grandmother had asked me to hold on to everything else. Tightly, quietly, no matter what. The first thing my father said to me about the cabin, the first real conversation, not the passing mentions at the funeral, came about 3 weeks after Grandma Ruth passed. We were having dinner, just the three of us, me, my dad, my mom Karen. My mom was quiet that night, which wasn't unusual. She had a way of going still when she sensed tension the way animals go still before weather. My father put down his fork and said, "Nora, we need to talk about the property in North Carolina." I said okay. He said that he and Uncle Dale had been thinking, and that the practical thing, the smart thing, would be to sell the cabin and the land. He said the market was good. He said the money could be split fairly. He said it would give me a real financial start college fund, down payment on a place of my own someday. He made it sound generous. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. I said, "Grandma Ruth told me the cabin was mine." He paused. Then he said, "Nora, your grandmother's wishes and what's actually in the legal documents are two different things. We need to have everything looked at properly." I said, "She told me to call Margaret Holloway." Something changed in his face when I said that name. Just for a second. It was there and then gone, a tightening around the eyes, a slight compression of the mouth. He said, "Who?" I said, "Margaret Holloway, Grandma Ruth's attorney." He said, "I don't think you need to worry about that. Let the adults handle the legal side." I was 17. In 4 months, I would be 18. I looked at my father across the dinner table and I said, very calmly, "Okay." But that night, I found Margaret Holloway's number and I saved it in my phone. The pressure didn't stop. It got more consistent over the following weeks, a steady drip of conversations, each one framed a little differently. Sometimes my father made it about money. Sometimes he made it about practicality, who was going to maintain 14 mountain acres, who was going to pay the property taxes. Did I have any idea what it cost to keep up a cabin at altitude? Sometimes Uncle Dale called and made it about family unity, everyone coming together, everyone getting a fair share. Wasn't that what Grandma Ruth would have wanted? I listened to all of it. I said very little, and I did not call Margaret Holloway. Not yet. I wanted to wait until I turned 18 because something in my gut told me that whatever Margaret was holding, it would land differently once I was legally an adult. My 18th birthday was in June. 3 weeks before it, my father sat me down and put a document in front of me. He said it was a consent form agreeing to list the property for sale and authorizing him and Uncle Dale to negotiate on my behalf. He said it was standard. He said it was simple. He said all I had to do was sign at the bottom. I looked at the document for a long time. I didn't understand all of it. The language was dense. The way legal language is dense when it's trying to hide something in plain sight. But I understood enough. I understood that signing it would give my father and uncle the authority to sell a property that my grandmother had told me was mine. I said, "Dad, I want to have someone look at this before I sign anything." He said, "Nora, it's just paperwork. You're making this complicated." I said, "I'm not trying to make it complicated. I just want to understand what I'm signing." His voice got tighter. He said, "Your grandmother left a mess. Dale and I are trying to clean it up. I need you to trust me." I said, "I do trust you. I just want someone to explain it to me first." He took the document back. He didn't say anything else that night. But the air in the house changed after that conversation, the way air changes before a storm, heavier, charged, expectant. I turned 18 on a Thursday in June. That Sunday, I called Margaret Holloway. She answered on the second ring. I told her my name. There was a brief pause and then she said, "Nora Callahan. Your grandmother told me you'd call. I've been waiting." Her voice was warm and completely unsurprised. "Can you come see me this week?" I drove 3 hours to her office the following Tuesday, without telling my father where I was going. What Margaret told me in that office rearranged everything I thought I understood. My grandmother, it turned out, had been planning for this for years, not months, years. She had watched her sons her entire adult life. She had loved them and she had known them, and she had understood, with the clear-eyed practicality of a woman who had taught children for 30 years, that loving someone and trusting them with something irreplaceable were two entirely different things. She had established an irrevocable trust 7 years before she died. An irrevocable trust, Margaret explained it carefully, and I want to explain it to you the same way, because understanding it is the whole key to this story. An irrevocable trust, once established, cannot be changed or dissolved by anyone except under very specific legal conditions. The person who creates it gives up ownership of the asset permanently. The asset belongs to the trust, and the trust has a named beneficiary. In this case, the trust held the cabin and the 14 acres, and the named beneficiary was me, Nora Callahan, to receive full control upon turning 18. My father and Uncle Dale had no legal claim to the property. None. They never had. The document my father had put in front of me, the one he called a simple consent form, was not a consent form. Margaret looked at a copy I had photographed on my phone, and her expression went very still. She said, "Nora, This is an attempt to transfer your beneficial interest in the trust to your father as trustee. If you had signed this, you would have handed him legal control of the property." I sat with that for a moment. I said, "He told me it was just paperwork." Margaret said, "I know." But it got worse. Because Margaret had been monitoring the property quietly as part of her responsibilities as the trust attorney, and she had discovered something in the weeks before I called her. My father and Uncle Dale had already been in contact with the real estate developer. A development company out of Asheville had been quietly exploring the acquisition of mountain properties in that region for a luxury resort project. My father and Uncle Dale had approached them not as authorized sellers, because they had no authority to sell, but as representatives of the estate. They had signed a letter of intent with the developer. They had accepted an earnest money deposit. They had done all of this without my knowledge, without my consent, without any legal right whatsoever. And they had given the developer a deadline. That deadline was in 11 days. Margaret explained what that meant. The letter of intent wasn't a binding sales contract, not yet. But it created a legal obligation window. If the developer didn't receive a fully executed purchase agreement by the deadline, the deal would collapse and the earnest money would be returned. My father and uncle needed my signature on that transfer document before the deadline. That was why the pressure had been building. That was why my father had put the document in front of me 3 weeks before my birthday. They had been counting on me signing before I ever made this phone call. I sat in Margaret's office and I felt something settle in me, not anger, exactly, although the anger was there. Something cooler than anger, something more useful. I thought about my grandmother sitting on that porch in the last light of our last summer, telling me to hold on. I thought about how she had known, how she had sat across from her own son at that kitchen table and smiled and talked about something else, and all the while she had already built a structure that would protect me when he came for what wasn't his. I looked at Margaret and I said, "What do I need to do?" She said, "You need to formally accept your position as beneficiary of the trust and exercise your rights as the legal owner of the property. Once you do that, your father and uncle have no standing. The developer deal collapses on its own. There was never a valid seller to begin with." She said there was one more thing. My father and uncle had not only approached the developer without authorization. Somewhere in the process, a document had been filed with the county recorder's office, a deed amendment bearing a signature that was purported to be mine. I had never signed any deed amendment. Margaret said the word carefully, the way attorneys say words they want you to remember: forgery. The room was very quiet for a moment. I said, "What do we do about that?" She said, "We document everything. We file the correct paperwork. And then we let the law do what it's designed to do." She told me we had 11 days. She told me she had been preparing for this moment since the day my grandmother first walked into her office 7 years ago. She said, "Ruth trusted me to be ready. I am ready. The question is whether you are." I was 18 years old. I had driven 3 hours alone to sit in a lawyer's office and learn that my father had forged my name on a legal document to steal property my grandmother had spent years protecting for me. I said, "Tell me exactly what I need to sign and when." I drove home the same day. 3 hours back through the mountains, windows down, not listening to anything, just thinking. I thought about my father. Not the man who had handed me a fraudulent document and called it paperwork, the other one. The one who had taught me to ride a bike in the parking lot of an empty church on a Saturday morning. The one who had shown up to every single one of my high school cross-country meets, even the away ones, even when the weather was bad. The one who had sat outside my door when I had a nightmare at age 9 and talked to me through the wood until I fell back asleep. I loved my father. That is the complicated, painful, completely true part of this story that I don't want to gloss over. Even knowing what he had done, what he had tried to do, I loved him. But love is not the same as permission. And understanding someone's hunger is not the same as feeding it at your own expense. I made a decision during that drive home. I was not going to confront my father. Not yet. Not until everything was filed and finalized and legally airtight. Because the moment I told him what I knew, the dynamic would shift. He and Uncle Dale would lawyer up. They might try to move faster with the developer. They might try to pressure me in ways I wasn't yet prepared for. My grandmother had been patient for 7 years. I could be patient for 9 days. I went home. I made dinner. I sat across from my father at the table where he had handed me that document, and I talked about ordinary things, the weather, a movie I had seen, a friend from school. I watched his face while he talked, and I thought, you have no idea. It was the strangest 9 days of my life. During the day, I was in near constant contact with Margaret, reviewing documents, answering questions, signing preliminary paperwork that she needed to file with the county to challenge the fraudulent deed amendment. She was methodical and calm and never once made me feel like a child, which I appreciated more than I could say. She explained the process. The fraudulent deed amendment would be challenged and voided. The irrevocable trust would be formally activated with me as the legal beneficiary of record. A letter would be sent to the development company informing them that the parties who had signed the letter of intent had no legal authority to do so, and that the property was not available for sale. And a report would be filed with the county sheriff's office regarding the forged signature. That last part gave me pause. I asked Margaret if the forgery report was necessary, if there was a way to handle everything civilly without the criminal piece. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Nora, I understand why you're asking, but your grandmother was very clear on this point. She told me, and I'm quoting her exactly because I wrote it down at the time, she said, Margaret, if they forge her name, I want it on record, not for punishment, for protection. So there is a permanent record that she did not consent, so they can never come back and claim she did. That was your grandmother's instruction. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, okay, file everything. On day 7, my father knocked on my bedroom door. He came in and sat on the edge of my desk chair, not on the bed, the way he used to sit when I was little, but the chair, careful and formal. He said, Nora, the deadline is in 4 days. I really need you to work with me on this. His voice was different from all the previous conversations, less certain. There was something underneath it, not desperation exactly, but the sound of a man who had started to sense that the ground wasn't as solid as he thought. I looked at him. I thought about what Margaret had said. I thought about what my grandmother had said. I thought about the cabin, the smell of cedar and wood smoke, the sound of rain on a green roof, the view from the front porch on a clear morning when the valley was full of mist. I said, Dad, I'm not going to sign anything. He said, Nora, I said, I know about the trust. I know about Margaret. I know about the developer and the letter of intent, and I know about the deed amendment with my name on it that I never signed. The silence that followed was one of the longest of my life. My father's face went through several things in quick succession: surprise, calculation, something that might have been shame, and then, finally, a careful stillness. He said, You've been talking to Margaret Holloway. I said, Yes. He said, Nora, you don't understand the full picture. There are things about this property, about the taxes, about the cost of maintaining. I said, Dad, stop. He stopped. I said, I'm not angry. I'm not going to yell at you. But I need you to hear me very clearly. The cabin belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. Grandma Ruth made sure of that. and I am going to honor what she did." He stood up. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Dale is going to be very upset." I said, "I know." He left the room. I heard him on the phone downstairs almost immediately. Uncle Dale, I assumed. Their voices were low, and I couldn't make out words, but I could make out tone. Urgent, frustrated, looking for a way out of something that had already closed around them. I texted Margaret. "He knows I know. 4 days." She replied within 2 minutes. "Everything is ready. Midnight on the 14th. Can you be here?" I said yes. On the 14th, I told my parents I was staying at a friend's house. I drove 3 hours back through the mountains in the rain. I arrived at Margaret's office at 11:30 p.m. She was already there. Lights on, 2 cups of coffee on her desk, every document lined up in order. She looked at me when I walked in and said, "Your grandmother would be proud of you." I sat down. I did not cry. I had decided I was not going to cry until it was done. At 11:58, she slid the final document across the desk. The formal acceptance of my position as sole beneficiary of the Ruth Elaine Callahan Irrevocable Trust, property parcel 7714, Blue Ridge Mountain County, North Carolina, 14 acres and 1 cedar cabin. At 11:59, I signed my name. The first thing that happened was the cleanest. Margaret sent a formal letter to the development company in Asheville the following morning. It stated that the property at parcel 7714 was held in an irrevocable trust with a named adult beneficiary, that the parties who had signed the letter of intent had no legal standing to represent or sell the property, and that the transaction was therefore void from its inception. The developer's attorney called Margaret back within 4 hours. They were professional about it. They had done their own due diligence at that point and had already begun to suspect that something wasn't right on the seller's side. The earnest money deposit was returned. The letter of intent was formally withdrawn. The deal was dead before the deadline ever arrived. I imagine my father found out around the same time from Uncle Dale. I was not home when it happened. I had driven straight from Margaret's office to a diner I liked about an hour from our house, and I had sat in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a piece of pie, and I had allowed myself, finally, to cry. Not in grief, or not only in grief, in relief, in exhaustion, in something that felt for the first time in many months like solid ground. When I got home, my father was sitting in the living room. My mother was in the kitchen, making noise with dishes the way she did when she was trying to give 2 people space to have a conversation. My father looked up when I came in. He looked older than he had looked the week before. I don't know how else to describe it. Something had gone out of him. He said, "It's done, isn't it?" It wasn't really a question. I said, "Yes." He said, "The cabin is yours." I said, "It always was." He nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands. He said, "Your grandmother knew I'd do this." I said, "Yes, she did." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "I'm sorry, Nora." I believed him. I want to be honest about that. I believe that he meant it in that moment, sitting in that living room. Whether the sorry extended all the way to what he had actually done, to the document he had put in front of me, to the developer deal he had orchestrated, to the signature that had appeared on a deed amendment that I had never signed, I don't know. But in that moment, I believed he was sorry. I said, "I know, Dad," and I went to bed. Uncle Dale was a different story. Dale did not come to me with sorry. Dale called my father in a fury when the developer deal collapsed, and the argument they had, which I could hear through the ceiling of my bedroom despite their best efforts, was loud and ugly and revealed, in its anger, exactly how much of this had been Dale's idea and how much my father had been pulled along by it. I won't repeat what was said, but I will say that after that phone call, my father and Uncle Dale did not speak for almost a year. The forgery investigation took longer. Margaret had filed a report with the county sheriff's office the morning after I signed. The investigation moved at the pace these things move, slowly, carefully, with a lot of paperwork and waiting. I was interviewed twice. I provided the evidence. Margaret and I had assembled the timeline, the unsigned document my father had shown me, the communications I had saved, the deed amendment with the signature that wasn't mine. I will not tell you that justice was swift or dramatic or satisfying in the way movies make you expect. What I will tell you is that after a 7-month investigation, Uncle Dale was charged with forgery of a legal instrument and fraudulent filing of a county record. He accepted a plea agreement that included a significant fine, probation, mandatory community service, and a permanent criminal record. My father was not charged. The investigation determined that while he had been complicit in approaching the developer and pressuring me to sign, there was insufficient evidence that he had been directly involved in the creation of the fraudulent document. Margaret told me the distinction was a legal one, not a moral one. I understood what she meant. My relationship with my father has never fully recovered. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people expect these stories to end cleanly, the villain punished, the family reunited, everyone wiser and better. That is not always what happens. My father and I are in each other's lives. We have dinner on holidays, we talk on the phone occasionally. But there is something between us now that wasn't there before, knowledge that lives in the space between every conversation. He knows what he did. I know what he did. We have both chosen, for now, to build something workable around that knowledge rather than letting it destroy what remains. Is that the right choice? I genuinely don't know. It is the choice I made. 3 months after everything was settled, I drove to the cabin alone for the first time. I had been there many times with Grandma Ruth. I had never been there alone. I pulled up the gravel drive in the late afternoon when the light was coming through the trees at that specific low angle that makes the mountains look like they're glowing from inside. I unlocked the front door with the key Margaret had given me, the original key, the one my grandfather had cut in 1972 and that had lived on a hook in Margaret's office for 7 years, waiting. The cabin smelled exactly the same. Cedar and wood polish, and something fainter underneath that I can only describe as time, the specific smell of a place that has been loved for 50 years. I walked through every room. I touched the kitchen table where Grandma Ruth had taught me to make biscuits. I stood on the back porch and looked at the valley. I sat in the chair on the front porch where she had sat the last evening of our last summer, and I watched the light change until it was nearly dark. I didn't feel triumph. I want to tell you I felt triumph, because that would be a cleaner story. What I felt was something quieter and more complicated, something like grief and gratitude braided together so tightly I couldn't separate them. I felt my grandmother in that place, the way you feel someone's presence in a room they've just left, the warmth still there, the shape of them still in the air. I sat on that porch until the stars came out, and then I went inside, made myself a cup of tea in her kitchen, and stayed the night. I still go to the cabin every summer. I go alone, mostly, though I've brought a few people there over the years, people I trust, which is a smaller number than it used to be and a better chosen one. I've done some repairs, replaced the roof shingles, repainted the porch railing. I keep it the way she kept it, carefully, lovingly, with the understanding that some places deserve to be maintained. On the wall of the small study, I hung a photograph of my grandparents standing in front of the cabin the summer they finished building it. They are young in the photo, younger than I am now, and they are both laughing at something off camera. My grandfather has sawdust on his shirt. My grandmother has her hand on his arm. I look at that photo every time I'm there, and every time I think about what it means to love someone enough to plan for their future when you won't be there to see it. To sit down with an attorney and say, I know what's coming. I know who my children are. I want to make sure that what I've built ends up in the right hands, no matter what they do to get in the way. That is not bitterness. That is love in its most practical form. My grandmother could not protect me from what my father and uncle did, but she built something that could, and she trusted me, a 16-year-old girl on a porch who barely understood what a trust was, to hold on to a name written in the back of a book until the moment came to use it. I have thought a lot over the years about what I would tell a younger version of myself. And what I keep coming back to is this: the people who truly love you don't just give you things. They build structures around those things. They plan for the worst. They leave you tools, not just gifts. And being young, being underestimated, being the one everyone assumes will just go along with whatever the adults decide, that is not a weakness. It is a position. And a position, if you're patient and you're paying attention, can become an advantage. I was 18 years old with a name written in the back of a book. And it was enough. Whatever you're holding on to right now, whatever someone is pressuring you to give up or sign away or stop believing in, I want you to remember that. It might be enough. Thank you for being here with me. If my story reached you, if you've ever been the youngest one in the room, the one they thought would be easiest to move, I want you to know that being underestimated is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. This is her Untold Nights. New stories every week. If you're new here, please subscribe and turn on the bell. I don't want you to miss what's coming next. And leave me a comment. Tell me, has someone ever underestimated you? What happened? I read every single one. Take care of yourself.